Tilea's Troubles, Part 124. The Last Months of Summer, 2404, Chapter 2. Another excerpt from Bonacorso Fidelibus's work, The Many Wars of the Early 25th Century. Lord Silvano, heir to the bedridden Duke Guidobaldo Gondi, was now ruling Pavona as regent. While his father lay in his palazzo, visited only by physicians and his most trusted servants, the young lord was glad to see that the city realm had at long last begun to recover from the cruel battering it had received at the ogre's brute hands. The town of Scorsese was thriving, having extended its cultivated lands and stocks of sheep and kine, while the once fruitful lands of Casoli and Todi showed signs of natural recovery, as Pavonan gentry, traders and peasants flocked to them, there to repair, rebuild and replant. Many were keen to leave the overcrowded city, where hunger had been so rife for so long. In the previously conquered realms of Trantio and Astiano there were signs of a similar recovery, although both presently lay outside Pavona's control. Lord Silvano announced that he had never yielded his authority as Gonfaloniere for life in Trantio, and had only appointed a substitute governor because he himself had been required to fulfil his holy and heartfelt vow to serve the Archlector against the vampires. It was that substitute, the wizard Belastra, who had failed to defend the city against Boldegut's double army. Lord Silvano declared that he took not just his vows but also his officers seriously, and so, unable to travel there himself due to his many and necessary duties as regent in Pavona, he sent a small force to ensure the safety of Trantio until he himself could return. These soldiers were ordered not just to protect the realm against an advance by the Uomini Ratto, but also to encourage the city's healing and enforce the good behaviour of the populace. Trantio, he declared, was to become a bastion from which to thwart any advance by the foe into Tilea's heartlands. As a consequence of the attempted assassination by their duke, by the Verezan brigand known as the Petirosso, a new hatred of halflings festered in the streets of Pavona. It was said that the Duke should have gone much further when banishing the dwarves several years previously, that he ought to have banished every kind of non-human, including halflings. Of course, this would not have stopped such enemies secretly infiltrating the realm, but it would have meant such assassins found none of their own kind to help or harbour them. Indeed, it was presumed exactly such had been the case, and that the villain Petirosso and his brigands had been given intelligence of the Duke's whereabouts, as well as shelter and sustenance, which was why the few halflings living within the city-state were arrested, either to be imprisoned or worse. The luckiest were thrown into dungeon cells, supposedly to await questioning, but oftentimes forgotten, while any considered able-bodied, or quick-witted enough to have assisted Pavona's enemies in some way, were hunted down by lynch mobs, to be most roughly handled. This became a cruel sport in the realm, which Lord Silvano did not rebuke in any way whatsoever. Here, perhaps, was a first glimpse that he possessed some of his father's notorious wrath. Or, maybe, it was his love for his wounded father that spurred his own hatred. Many halflings were pilloried and branded, while those believed to have aided Petirosso's band in any way were strung up, exhibited alive so that the people could see the fate awaiting all traitors. Some such poor souls were so treated for many days, so that once the baying mob grew bored and drifted away, the more genteel Pavonans might spend a few undisturbed moments viewing them, giggling at their pathetic state and fate. Some were alive when finally cut down, but most had died, as a consequence of the rough handling they had received from the crowd, the lack of food and drink, or a brutal combination of both. Meanwhile, the city-state of Verzo continued to prepare for war against Pavona, now, during Lord Lucia's nephew's minority, being ruled in practice by the bitterly angry halfling noble Barone Iacopo, made both Capitano del Popolo and regent. The Barone bolstered the realm's forces as best he could, mustering new pike and crossbow soldiers in the Tilean style, yet it was commonly doubted that he had anywhere near sufficient force to defeat the stoutly walled city of Pavona, defended by its still not insignificant army. The Baroni became further angered by the Pavonan accusation that a Verezan agent, the Petirosso, had attempted to assassinate Duke Guidobaldo, declaring it a lie. He announced that the Duke of Pavona had most likely now added further slander to his litany of well-known and proven crimes, the worst of which was the murder of Lord Lucia Vescusi in an entirely unwarranted, predatory attack on Verzo at a time of emergency in all of Tilea. And, he said, even if the Petty Rosso was responsible for the attempt on Guidobaldo's life, then it would be a measured punishment for Lord Lucia's assassination, and thus no bad thing. Upon later hearing of the maltreatment of halflings in Pavona, the Barone became almost apoplectic with rage. And so, Iacopo suggested that considering Duke Guidobaldo's grievous wounds and his litany of crimes, the Pavonan ruler must urgently prepare his soul for its journey into Moor's heavenly garden, by way of prayer and penance. Furthermore, the Barone demanded that Duke Guidobaldo personally apologises for Lord Lucia's cruel murder by travelling to Verzo to attend a public service in the Moorite temple there. Or, if he was too ill to do so, then he should send his son, Lord Silvano, as his proxy, just as he sent the same son to answer General Valkenburg of the army of the VMC before the walls of Pavona, after his slandering of the said general by claiming it was his forces that had killed Lord Lucia. Or, if Duke Guidobaldo refused to apologise and beg for the forgiveness of Moor and the good people of Verzo, that he should allow himself to be subjected to a church-led legal inquiry in Holy Remas concerning his actions and claims, and if found guilty of any crime, should pay whatever reparations were judged appropriate, and undertake whatever penance was deemed necessary. Or, if he was too ill to do that, then he should send his son, Lord Silvano, to stand as his proxy in the church inquiry. The Pavonan nobility advising Lord Silvano considered these demands outrageous, especially as they came from a petty noble ruling a city-state that had committed numerous slights and slanders against the Gondi family in the past. The Moorite lector of Pavona, Mauro Capoliccio, said the halfling lord must be mad to believe he could make such demands of the Riemann Church of Moor. Besides, he added, even if the Archlector were to allow such an inquiry, then, as part of the committee charged with the duty to discover the truth of the matter, he could prove Duke Guidobaldo had only ever served Moor and the gods first, his own realm second, and Tilea third, which was all that could ever be asked of a noble Tilean ruler. The young Lord Silvano, however, being of his own mind, chose to satisfy Barone Iacopo's demands by sending a proxy, Urquhart, the refugee lector of Trantio, to answer the summons and attend any judicial procedure. This was indeed done. Upon arrival in Verzo, Lector Urquhart met with the Barone Iacopo, who was attended by several of his newly raised guard companies. The lector informed the halfling lord that Duke Guidobaldo was indeed far too ill to travel, or even to leave his bed, having been so badly wounded by the assassin brigand Petty Rosso that his son, Lord Silvano, could not possibly leave his many duties as regent, especially as Pavona itself also lies wounded still. With father and son so disabled and distracted, Urquhart was there to stand in place of both, to offer the Duke of Pavona's apologies for any and all assumed and proven offences. Bowing most humbly before the Barone, he offered himself as Duke Guidobaldo's substitute to receive punishment. Barone Iacopo was said to be lost for words, for he considered this sending of an unasked-for proxy to be simply another Pavonan insult. His advisers were equally stunned, and indeed afraid to offer advice to their obviously irate master. When the Barone finally spoke, it was to curse the lector, the Duke, his son, and all Pavonans, and in no uncertain terms. At that very moment, one of the lector's two Pavonan guards brought down his halberd's blade and struck the back of Urquhart's head, apparently attempting to lop it off. Prevented from completing his attack by the Barone's more numerous guards, both he and the other Pavonan guard were restrained. When questioned, the guard confessed that his act was a misunderstanding, that he thought that such a punishment was required, and believed it only right and proper that a soldier of Pavona should carry out the execution. Lector Urquhart subsequently lay unconscious under the care of a doctor of physic in Verzo, who was doubtful he would ever recover. His attacker was imprisoned, as Barone Iacopo was not at all satisfied with the account offered. The second guard was sent back to Silvano, there to deliver the message that this response to Barone Iacopo's justified demands was in every way entirely unacceptable. What the Riemann Archlector, Bernardo Ugolini, truly thought concerning this dispute was anyone's guess, for His Holiness did not reveal his mind when he learned of these events. He had fought beside both Duke Guidobaldo and his son in several battles against both the vampires and the ogres, forging a strong alliance with Pavona. Yet, at the same time, he had long respected Lord Lucio Vescusi of Verzo, the two having been friends and fellow students under the same Riemann tutor in their youth. During the vampire wars, Bernardo, just as Callictus II before him, strove to avoid any division or conflict between the city-states of Tilea. And now, with the threat presented by the Rat-men, could not reasonably be expected to steer a contrary diplomatic course. Nevertheless, it was openly rumoured among the high clergy that His Holiness Bernardo knew a good deal about the disagreement between Pavona and Verzo, having a deep insight into the true nature of those concerned. The South. By the end of summer, having stripped Capelli of every horse available to replace his army's broken mounts, General Valkenburg of the VMC and his shattered men arrived at the ruins of Matola. Much of his foot, with the artillery, was somewhere just south of Raverno, and he had yet to hear from Lucia La Fanculia in the far, far north. Leaving the bulk of his exhausted men at the ruins, Valkenburg went ahead with a small party to the city of Alente. There he learned that the city's hastily raised garrison force had chosen not to pursue the Sartosan army along the road east, as they had suspected the enemy's manoeuvre was a ruse to lure them away from the city, exactly as the Sartosans had previously successfully tried, leading to the losses incurred at the Battle of Sassale. This time, however, it turned out not to be so, for it soon became clear that the pirates intended to sack the newly prosperous port town of Pavezzano, where they could also embark upon their ships if it proved necessary. They razed the watchtower of Terzi as they passed, taking prisoners, which they later butchered, and there was now nothing the general could do to stop them. Pavezzano was indeed assaulted, while the Sartosan fleet, which had arrived offshore before the army, cannonaded the defences. There followed a cruelly comprehensive sacking. Presumably, General Valkenburg cursed his decision to take so much so far north. For the first time since the VMC had defeated Kernag's army, the native Alcentians had begun to wonder whether they really could expect prosperity and peace under VMC rule, and some began rueing the day that military governorship was granted to these foreign soldiers. None, however, were foolish enough to voice their concerns too loudly, for the VMC soldiers were still numerous, with more yet to return, and the mercantile company employing them was itself backed by investors with deep pockets, who knew full well just how much they could profit from possession of such a large swathe of fruitful lands in southern Tilea, and who were no doubt willing to send whatever was required to ensure that future income. The Sartosan fleet, carrying Admiral Volker's battered but still intact army and a vast quantity of plunder, passed by Alcente on its way back towards Sartosa, bearing some distance south. Even after a string of victories and so many settlements looted, they remained cautious of the VMC ships and soldiers, probably aware that if reinforcements had arrived by land or sea, then the enemy might well have regained sufficient strength to defeat them easily in battle. Perhaps unsurprisingly, despite the vast wealth stolen from no less than 5 settlements under Alcentian and thus VMC rule, the Sartosan's insatiable greed was not yet satisfied. And so it was that the wizard, Duke Ercole Perotto, uncle to the hostage King Ferronzo III of Lucini, became at long last involved in serious negotiations for his nephew's release. He met with several of Admiral Volker's emissaries at one of the coastal watchtowers studding the shore for several miles south of the city of Lucini. Ferronzo's realm had begun to heal after the pirates' incursion, and several Tilean banking families recognised that there was a profit to be made by lending Duke Ercole the sums of money required, underwritten by a share of the recovering realm's future tax income. Of course, the Sartosans cared not a jot for these details, only for getting as much gold as they could, while ensuring they gave no hint concerning just how much Admiral Volker wanted rid of his annoyingly troublesome prisoner.